Hey, welcome everybody. I'm Rick Hess, Director of Education Policy Studies at AEI. Welcome to today's conversation. Is there common ground in education? The conversation with me and my friend and colleague, Jorge Elorza, who runs Democrats for Education Reform. This event is part of AEI's James Q. Wilson program in K-12 Education Studies, and we are delighted to have all of you with us. Jorge Elorza is the CEO of Democrats for Education Reform. From 2015 to 2023, he served 2 terms as mayor of Providence, Rhode Island. And prior to serving as mayor, he served as Providence Housing Court judge, worked as a legal aid attorney, and was a professor at Roger Williams University School of Law. If you have questions at home and you'd like to get them over to us, you can hit us on Twitter or X at hashtag AEI Hess Elorza. All right. What we're going to do this afternoon, is we want to talk a little bit about where there's room for common ground or shared agreement around issues in education, but we also want to talk some about where and why we disagree in a way to make sure that the conversation's not about happy talk, but about principled understanding and principled disagreement. But for a start, Jorge, maybe for folks who aren't familiar with Democrats for Education Reform, would love to give you a chance just to talk a little bit about the work you guys do and how they roped you into taking the helm when Shavar went over to KIPP.
Yeah, so thank you for having me here, Rick, and thank you for creating this platform and this forum for us to find where there is common ground and have productive conversations, so I appreciate it. So I run Democrats for Education Reform. We do the policy and politics of education. We were created almost 20 years ago, and the idea was that our founders assessed correctly that politics matters a great deal when it comes to education policy. And so how do we get the politics right around education so that we can move good policy forward? Throughout our time, we've been very closely aligned with charter schools, with the charter movement. And our organization came of age during those days, 10 to 20 years ago, where there was just so much energy, interest, and excitement around education and charter schools. And so our organization came in, and whether it was through our state chapters or through our federal advocacy, we'd build relationships with elected officials, make sure that they knew that we were Democrats. We spoke with democratic language, and we understood democratic values, and we advocated for these policies that were sometimes aligned with the right. And our organization would go into these rooms and let them know that, no, they actually align with core democratic values. And we are Team Blue, but we think differently about education on this issue. And so that's why we've been able to be very effective over the years. And so speaking about myself and my own journey, I ran for mayor initially because I wanted to transform the public schools in Providence, Rhode Island. And I came in, and I can tell you that I learned a lot about both the policy and the politics of education. And as I was leaving office, I still felt that there was a lot of unfinished business, a lot of work to be done. And I found this opportunity where I get to apply the skills that I've honed over the past decade of my life, the politics, and continue to apply them to a cause that I care deeply about. So this is my life's mission, this is my life's work, and I just feel so thankful and privileged to be able to do it here as the head of Democrats for Education Reform.
So I'd love to go back, and we'll do a little bit of way back with that 20 years ago stuff. But I'm curious, right now, it seems like, from where I sit, that it's probably been a fairly frustrating few years at DFR. The Biden administration does certainly, in best case, has not made charter schools a priority. From where I sit, it seems like they've generally been hostile. The kinds of issues that DFR tends to talk about have seemed not to get a lot of traction. Accountability, kind of making sure schools are serving all kids well. So I'm curious, A, is that a fair or unfair characterization in the last few years? And how has DFER tried to navigate kind of its role in the Democratic coalition?
So that's a very fair characterization. It's been a lot of uphill climbs, a lot of swimming against the current, all of that for Democrats with and education reform. I think it started roughly about 10 years ago, and it certainly became very difficult for Democrats in reform when President Trump was elected. The whole issue of choice and reform became very toxic, and Democrats, wanted nothing to do with it. And then when President Biden came in, his focus was on the pandemic. And there were a lot of monies that they made available for K through 12 public education. But in terms of reform, that just wasn't a focus for them at the time. And so it's been a good 8 to 10 years since we've had national Democratic leadership on education issues. And so frankly, in the past 8 to 10 years, many of those Democratic elected champions, many of them have left office. Some of them have moved on to other priority issues. And at the level of the language, the ideas, the policies, the vision for education left of center, that all needs to be rebuilt. And so we're not entirely starting from scratch, but we have a lot of work to do. So that's what's in front of us. But I am ever the optimist, and in the spirit of never letting a good crisis go to waste, something that is present today that just wasn't present in the past is, we would be going to Democrats and we'd make the policy case, we'd make the moral case, but now we have a very powerful political case to make as well. 10 years ago, Democrats used to have a 26-point advantage when it came to voter trust on education over Republicans. COVID changed everything, and so today, that advantage has almost entirely disappeared. Some poll results show that we're in fact underwater, both nationally and in the all-important battleground states. All to say that Democrats, we used to fashion ourselves as the party of education. It's hard to say that we still are. And so now being armed with the political case, combined with the policy and the moral case, it gives us another sort of quiver of ammunition. And I'll tell you, when we're talking to electeds, I've always believed that show me your incentives and I'll show you your outcomes. If we talk to folks about the political incentives aligning around taking more action on education policy, starts to get folks' attention. So I'm optimistic about that, and I want to make sure that we are providing enough of a roadmap, sort of laying the breadcrumbs to make it easier and easier, and therefore more likely and more likely that Democrats will embrace and champion these issues.
One of the things, you talked a bit about the national political climate with Trump and then the pandemic, but also, 10 years ago, you referred to, right, there was a time when there was a lot of Democratic support for folks who were running as school reformers. There were, big dollar dinners in places like New York City. There were major foundations that spent a lot of money supporting groups that were doing the kind of advocacy. It feels like that's much less a part of the current landscape. What changed?
I spend a lot of time talking to folks who were deeply involved in the ed reform movement in its heyday and have drifted away to other issues. What I hear is a fair bit of disappointment. There was this belief that, if we just built a better mousetrap, things would take care of themselves. And so there were millions of dollars invested into charter schools, and charter schools have shown and continue to show that they're outperforming the traditional schools, educating the exact same kids and producing better outcomes. And the promise was, we just have to provide the proof points. And once we have those proof points, everything else would take care of itself. And so there's disappointment that that wasn't enough. And part of the case that we make is, once again, that education, politics really matters with education. And it's not just about getting the policy right and doing the hard work. You got to get the politics of this right. And so a lot of folks have drifted away. They were hoping to see a lot more progress a lot sooner. And that's basically my job every day, making the case that there's reason for optimism, that let's not completely give up on this, and drawing more and more of those folks back to prioritizing and championing this cause.
You know, another piece of the backdrop is obviously we've seen this polarization along formal education that's grown dramatically over the last 5-10 years, to the point where the Democrats have increasingly become the party of folks with college degrees, Republicans increasingly the party of folks who haven't gone to college. And we've also seen that start to reduce the amount of racial sorting that folks have. So I'm curious how that's complicated Democratic politics around things like choice and charter schooling and accountability as you've started to see these coalitions shift.
So a couple of things. So the first is that the issues that we advocate for in the reform community are broadly popular. They're broadly popular with Democrats, with independents, and Republicans, right? So if you're drawing the Venn diagram, right, the overlap in the middle, there's this massive overlap in what each of those groups care about. But that's talking about the voting public. That support at the ground level hasn't translated into support at the political level, in part, I believe, because the political incentives don't fully aligned, and so that's one of the challenges. What we advocate for is broadly popular. The second piece in terms of education levels and how we've become more polarized. I think I spent a lot of time thinking about why Democrats have lost the advantage of being the party of education. The truth is that, as I mentioned, there really is no left of center vision on education. That needs to be rebuilt. Whereas on the right, there is what I believe is a big idea, private school choice. And I put myself in the position of low-income family in Providence or Philadelphia or name any central city. And here comes someone saying, imagine if I offered you X thousand dollars that you can use and take anywhere, and it potentially provides better educational opportunities for your kids today. The families that I'm in touch with on a regular basis, they'll look at that offer and say, yeah, I want that. I want more of that. And not to suggest that that is the answer, but there has been no alternative that's been offered by our side. And so if we want to be considered the party of education again, like what are we offering? What are we selling? What is the vision that resonates at a deep level with the folks that we have always assumed would be reliable voters on our side? At a certain point, what you offer and the policies that you champion, they have to be aligned with the interests and what your base wants. And what we're seeing very clearly is that what has been advocated for politically by our party when it comes to education policy is more and more at odds with what I see the base of the party, the voters, actually wanting.
So, obviously, I love the notes you're striking here on private school choice, but I imagine some folks who are watching or listening are saying, wait a minute, does this mean you're kind of endorsing the same approach to education savings accounts or vouchers as Republicans, or are there particular points or distinctions that come up when you start thinking about this?
Yeah, so our organization, we do not support private school choice, and the reasons for that are we haven't seen an ESA program or voucher program that fully aligns with our values and our priorities around accountability, around civil rights protections, and being targeted specifically to the folks who need it the most. But stepping back, we as an organization, we have always been on the side of choice, right? And that's a powerful reason why we've been such strong advocates for charter schools over the years. Let's expand the range of options and choices that families have to choose from, and how do we ensure that they're high quality options. If I can step back for a second as well in terms of our vision and our approach to this, I truly, the way that I frame the fundamental problem in education is that the fundamental problem is that our schools are not getting better fast enough, if they're getting better at all.
Yeah, NAEP would suggest we might be going the wrong direction, right?
Yeah. And what we believe is that the reason why they're not getting better faster is because they're not designed to. So at a systems level, if we were designing a system, and I'm talking about any system, that was designed to evolve and produce better results, we would have at least three elements, right? We would have variety, right? So innovation and heavy incentives for it. We'd have a focus on outcomes and accountability so that we're only investing in what actually moves the needle and what works, as opposed to the way we handle it today where every year we pass a budget and the new budget is basically a replica of the previous year's budget. And the last component is choice, so that families for themselves can choose among these various options and see which ones actually move the needle and work well for them. So we believe in greater innovation and scaling, we believe in accountability, and we believe in choice. And the reality is that when you look at public education systems throughout the country, there's not nearly as enough innovation and scaling of it as there needs to be. There's very little accountability for performance, and there's very little choice for families. And so, of course, a system like that would stagnate over time, and that's what we have.
So, I mean, one, I guess I'm curious. I mean, I can imagine you going in to talk to a governor or a mayor or the Biden administration and talking about accountability and across the tables, Teachers Association, who I think tend to regard choice as promoted by billionaires, who are skeptical of accountability. They obviously have a lot more support and votes to bring to the table. How do you get traction in the Democratic coalition in that landscape?
That's a great question. And so my organization, right, we do policy through politics. And so living at the intersection of policy and politics is what we focus on every hour of every day. The reality is that for elected Democrats, the politics, the incentives around the politics of education just don't align.
In what sense? They don't align?
So in a couple of senses. First of all, we're not the teachers union. We don't have the money to spend in campaigns. We don't have the personnel to turn out. We're not organized in that way. And so there are inherent advantages that they have. The second is politically, who's in charge of education, right? Education is such a local issue. Is it the mayor? Mayors very rarely control their school systems. Is it the superintendent? Is it the school board? Or is it the state commissioner? Is it the governor? Is it the legislature? At least in democratic states, it is very rare, if at all, that elected officials get voted out of office because the schools are underperforming. And so the calculus that any official makes is, all right, I can wade into this, and if I wade into it, I'm certainly inviting the wrath of a very powerful stakeholder group. Or I can stay out of it and focus on other issues that are really important and I care a great deal about, and no one's going to hold me accountable for underperforming schools. So that's what I mean, that the incentives don't align. So figuring out how can we be most effective, given that this is just, it's not a problem, it's a condition, a condition that needs to be managed. And
on that, what was different 10 or 15 years? Do you have a sense of why DFER was able to have so much weight despite the unions back then in a way that it's not now?
Yeah, so this is my theory of the case. Political leadership matters a great deal. And the political leadership that matters more than any other is executive leadership. So executives, they set the agenda. Executives provide policy guidance and they provide political cover. We had President Clinton leading from Washington, and we certainly had President Obama. and they gave that political cover all the way down ballot, even at the local office. We just haven't had that executive leadership coming from Washington over the past, eight or so years. But that still leaves governors. And I think that there's a lot of opportunity with governors throughout the country. First of all, governors are competitive, right? When you get elected governor, when you get elected even as mayor, I felt it. On day 2, I felt like I was running out of time. I wanted to have as much impact in as many areas as I possibly could. And governors are that same way. They're also very competitive with each other. There's a crop of governors right now. It's always been Governor Polis in Colorado, who's been a star, has been a champion on our issues. But now we're seeing Governor Shapiro in Pennsylvania. We're seeing Governor Moore. We're really excited about hopefully soon to be Governor Meyer in Delaware, total reformer, and other folks in elections in 25 and 26 that we fully expect are going to be championing education issues more. So to them, the difference of a few hundred votes at the local level, at the precinct level, isn't going to make as much of a difference at the state level. You have a little bit more freedom. You have a little bit more power if you choose to take it. And I think that there's an opportunity to really engage that executive leadership, to work with them to develop not just policies that are impactful, but also that resonate politically and that they sell with the public. So as we have gone through this nadir where we're now no longer leading on education as a party, I fully expect, hopefully the Harris administration embraces this, but even if they don't fully embrace it, I fully expect that there's going to be a crop of governors that do.
So, speaking of politics meets policy, next Tuesday, there's at least 2 referenda that I feel like are particularly relevant. One is the MCAS graduation requirement is on the ballot in Massachusetts, which is both an incredibly blue state and also maybe the most successful state when it comes to school improvement over the last few decades. There is second, there's an amendment on the ballot in Colorado, Polis's kind of light blue state, which would enshrine a vaguely described right to choice in the state constitution. Curious how DFER kind of thinks about these 2 referenda, if you're involved in them. Curious what role you play there.
Yeah, we're keeping a watch on them, of course. We've been very involved in the Massachusetts referendum, and that's we're hopeful, but we know it's going to be very, very close. As you know, what was it? Maybe 10 years ago, there was another referenda in Massachusetts that did not go well.
The charter referendum.
Yep. To expand charters. And over the past 10 years, I think that 2 things are true. First, that as we've been discussing, the reform side of the Democratic Party just has lost steam and has lost influence and power. That's true. But the non-reform wing of the party, they've remained just as strong and just as and just as active. And I think that in a moment of weakness for the reform side, the timing aligned where they could get this on the ballot, and hopefully the community has done enough in Massachusetts to push back on this next Tuesday. But in all the polling that we're seeing, it's going to be tight. And I still believe that if you ask the traditional base of the party, low income, black and brown folks, working class folks, I think they want higher standards, not lower standards. I think that so many families have experienced their own kids being moved along, being passed along, sometimes graduating from high school, not having the minimum skills required for the world that awaits them. Our parents see this every single day, and as a party, if we're not championing their cause and speaking to what matters to them more than anything, it's going to be tough sledding for us, politically. And something that we have to keep in mind, especially around, I focus a great deal on low-income low-income Black and brown families, so urban and rural. For families like that, our path to a more comfortable life, our opportunity for upward mobility, is almost universally dependent on the quality of the public schools. There aren't many other pathways for them. There's no like interning at my uncle's law firm or taking over the family business. For so many folks, we rely so heavily on the quality of our public schools, and so us Democrats, as a matter of political survival and sharp political interest, this is an issue that we have to begin leading on again.
I mean, this makes me. My understanding, which I could be wrong, correct me if I'm wrong, in Massachusetts, is that a lot of the opposition to MCAS graduation requirements is now a collaboration of the unions and a lot of highly educated, the types who populate like schools of education, and that the folks who tend to be on their side are folks with more traditional norms and values. And this feels like a lot of kind of the culture clashes we've seen in education over the last 4 or 5 years, certainly around school closures. We saw it break down this way. It strikes me that some of the fights around gender identity, certainly around school discipline, tend to be kind of the educated versus folks who have more traditional kind of norms and values. And that seems to have created real tensions on the Democratic side of the aisle between kind of the educated white progressives and kind of some of the more traditional Democratic high school educated constituencies in the Black and Latino community. Curious kind of how you think about this because, curious how you think about this.
So if I could just step back a little bit, I was a law professor for 10 years, and so I can never shed like the academic in me.
Yeah.
Are you familiar, Rick? There's this research, some Princeton professors, maybe about a decade ago. They looked at public policy and laws that Congress passed. And it's one of these massive data sets, right? So they looked at polling going back like decades and every law that was passed. And what they found was that the laws that get passed, they do align with public opinion. However, if you control for the public opinions of the economic elites, the public opinion of the non-elites, factor in almost nothing into the policies that actually get passed, which is really sobering, which is actually very, very, very depressing to hear. And so,
although it always depends how much faith we put in these, Ivy League econometric analyses, but the point taken.
Yeah, I've read the research and it's a solid piece of work. But anyways, so with that in mind. I mean, there is this economic, this economic divide or class divide that I think we're in the midst of a political realignment, and class is a big part of how the realignment is shaken out. I try to avoid the cultural issues. And
talk to me a bit about that. Because one of the things that, when I talk about where I think the right got it wrong, say in the Bush era, was this separation of kind of core values from policy wonkery. So No Child Left Behind was very kind of technocratic. It was the kind of thing that, blue or red, we could all kind of get behind if you liked that kind of thing. But it felt really removed from a lot of what families talk about at the kitchen table. So. And whereas the culture stuff often seems to tap into things that kind of so I'm just curious, how do you think that through?
So, I'm the child of immigrants. I was raised in an immigrant household, and from the time I can remember, it's education, education, education. It's just embedded deeply into your psyche that education is the ticket to a better life. My parents. My mother has a 4th grade education, my dad has a 3rd grade education, and this idea that, you should be thankful that you have the opportunity to study, that's just like a big part of like the culture and the identity. And I think that's true for so many low-income families. Like, I might not have had the best education, but if you study and you do things right, that's your ticket to a better life. That's embedded deeply, and I think that's truly what people care about. And frankly, when you look at the public schools and the places where these families live and where they study, we're just not making the grade. How can, I'll tell you, Providence, Rhode Island, my own city, today, 2.4% of high school seniors can do math at grade level at the traditional schools. Like 2.4%, like, it's indefensible. How can we allow that? Baltimore, we've read about the 23 schools in Baltimore that have not one single child doing math at grade level, right? And Chicago is bad. The Deep South is even worse. It's outrageous. It's indefensible. The state of public education throughout it truly is a national crisis. And so I think about the importance of education and the level of the crisis. And then I try to match that up with the urgency to address this. And they just don't align. They just don't match. And I think that this issue of education, which party is going to lead on education, it's fertile ground for a lot of votes for the party that really owns this issue.
Gets there first
to win a lot of folks over.
So I mean that really landed for me. And so let's talk about this culture thing a bit, because I think there's something to unpack here. So there's certainly this kind of performative culture stuff where folks, there's a certain kind of character who likes going on like social media and kind of being outrageous, and they get a lot of followers, and it's fun for them, and that tends to shape a lot of this. But what I just heard you talk about, kind of this immigrant tradition of valuing education. It strikes. So let me give you a couple examples, and I'd love to have you kind of just respond or riff to all of them. So one thing today is that it seems to me that we have created a culture in schools where we are exquisitely, that there's pressure, at least, to be exquisitely kind of respectful of different kind of national traditions, creeds, unless if we're talking about American history. And in which case, there's a lot of pressure on schools to make sure that we are constantly talking about the ways in which America is oppressive, is hierarchical, is problematic. So when I think about culture, I think about one, I'd like us to be as respectful of our shared national tradition as of those traditions that students bring with them to this country.
Yeah.
A second
Can I answer to that one?
Let me give you a couple, and then you can riff at length. A second is, for me, a big culture piece is kind of the notion of safe schools. It seems that in the name of equity, we've grown very uncomfortable with a lot of discipline and order and the work of keeping schools orderly. And the third is when I hear you talk about your parents imparting those values to you, I hear a message of self-discipline and personal responsibility, that when I use the word personal responsibility in mixed company and education today, it's very easy to get attacked as being an unreasonable and a white supremacist and all manner of things. So for me, I understand that there's the cultural silliness, but I also feel like some of these cultural tensions are at the heart of kind of this value you're talking about. And I'm wondering where we're similar and where we're different on how we think about that.
So two things come to mind. The first is with teaching American history. I don't think we have to choose one or the other. This is the greatest nation on the history of Earth. The only place where a story like mine is possible. I am eternally grateful that my parents were able to come. They came as undocumented immigrants. They made every sacrifice to this day. They make every sacrifice so that my sister and I could have a better life. And so I never take that for granted. At the same time, I want my child to learn the full history, like warts and all. Telling about, our high points and our low points doesn't make us any less proud. I truly believe that every generation has the responsibility to make this a more perfect union. And there's no choosing one or the we don't have to choose one or the other. And so that's the first thing that comes to mind. The second thing that I'll say, coming back to this being a space where it's fertile ground for the party that gets this right, they can win over some votes. I'm going to speak specifically about the Latino community, because the Latino community I understand the best. And I think I can say on record, I don't have the highest opinions of President Trump. If I wasn't in the space, I would use very different and very colorful and animated language. But I got to tell you that I spend a lot of time in my community with Latinos who have warmed to him. And this is by no means an endorsement of this, but I do want to relate what I hear from them and what the attraction is. And so, remember that many Latinos are just naturally, inherently conservative, so socially conservative, the Catholic background. Many Latino immigrants who come to this country, they know what it's like when social disorder breaks down, neighborhoods that are run over by gangs. And so, Latinos, frankly, are very open to sort of stronger policing tactics. It's just sort of part of the culture for so many folks who come. And then last, just the reason why my family came to this country is because of education. It is just so central to who they are and to their identity. And the schools in the neighborhoods and the cities where we live, they're just not making the grade, and it's so obvious and apparent to so many families. And this idea of let's just blow everything up. Again, I'm not endorsing it, but this is what I hear from the community of why they're just attracted to a different approach. So I disagree with that assessment when I hear it, but I understand. And so this idea of personal responsibility, this idea of sort of safety and discipline, I get why it's been helpful politically. But my general take, and I think a way forward is, there's a lot of angst, anxiety, and frankly a lot of anger out there in the world. And I do believe that there are a lot of elected officials that essentially convey the message, I know you're angry, and let me help make you even more angry. and I reject that approach. But when it comes to education in particular, I think there is a lot of reason to be angry. And I want our party to be angry as well. Let's turn that anger into something productive and into something positive. And I think that would be a winning issue for us.
So I love what you just had to say, and I think your framing, say, of the civics and history piece, I don't feel any daylight between. I love the way you framed it. For me, the real problem is something like with the 1619 Project, which very explicitly said America's a slaveocracy, and that becomes the framing device. And and the Bill of Rights is a tool of oppression. That strikes me as neither historically accurate, nor constructive. But this point that we should be grateful for the nation we've inherited, but honest and clear-eyed, I love that. So let me ask this. I know DFER tends to focus more on kind of the policy than on these threads. But when you are talking to supporters, when you're talking to governors about issues like civics and social studies and history, or about school discipline, What do you tell them? Where do you guys stand on how we think about that?
So those conversations, I haven't been engaged directly in those conversations. I mentioned that the left of center vision on education needs to be built up almost from scratch. I mean, we're starting. I've met with gubernatorial candidates who've told me like one of two things, but it's basically the same point. Folks have told me the more I learn about education, the less I know exactly what to do. Or second is, I want to lead on education. What should I do? And so, there's just a lot of basics, sort of basic building blocks that have to be put in place. It doesn't get to that level of the cultural issues or yeah. But this is my general approach. So we're always looking for elected officials that are aligned on our policy priorities. But to be honest with you, I'm almost agnostic about the kind of issues that Democrats or Democratic governors champion. But what I'd like to see is education be talked about, K through 12 education. When we talk about either an opportunity economy or we're talking about our local economic, our economic development visions in our respective states, let's make sure that K through 12 is embedded in that, right? It's a core part of your vision and your agenda. I'll take that. And then the other piece is there's a lot of directions that you can go in that will drive results for kids. But thinking as executives, what we urge governors to do is just set a very clear student-centered goal that is time-bound, that is concrete, and let it be known to your team, this is what you expect them to accomplish by the end of 2 years, by the end of 4 years, and by the end of 8 years, and you're going to hold them accountable, and you're willing to expend political capital to make sure that they're able to get their job done.
And should those be in terms of academic proficiency, or what kinds of outcomes do you prefer?
So yeah, we start off with academic proficiency. So do we want 100% of third graders reading at grade level? And can we get that done in 8 years, right? Or set a goal. We want to 2x, we want to double the number of 8th graders taking algebra. We want 100% of high school students who want one, we want them to have access to a skills-based internship. So we're almost agnostic of what it is, but plant a stake in the ground.
So here you guys play in Texas. Recently, last year, the state took over the Houston School District, Republican governor, right? Republican state chief. They brought in Mike Miles to run it. Very intense politics around this. Curious if you guys have a stance on that approach and on what Miles is doing.
Well, I sat through a presentation recently on what Mike Miles is doing, and I'll tell you, I was just floored. I was floored to the point.
In a good way or a bad way?
In a very positive way. The report was on sort of their outcomes, the early results that they're seeing, and it's really impressive. And so impressive that it makes you a little skeptical. Like, can this actually be real? But it was that impressive. And so if you look at it from the perspective of kids, and those results are real, like we have no reason to assume that they're not, but let's assume that they are. How can we not enthusiastically, not just embrace but celebrate what's happening there, right? Because if the focus is student-centered, it's really about the kids. What's happening there is just absolutely remarkable.
All right, let's open it up. Folks have questions. We've got Anna and Riley catch an eye. Do me a favor, 2 things. 1, identify yourself by name and affiliation. And 2, ask a question. If we get 30 seconds in and we don't spot a question, we'll give somebody else a chance. Yes, ma'am.
Hi, I'm Emily Samos. I'm a consultant doing work with the Campaign for Grade Level Reading among many other organizations. And so the one aspect of culture and such and education that you have not talked about, which I typically bring up, is parents. On the right, there's a very loud voice among parents. Do they actually care about how well kids are actually performing, or who's making the call about how well kids are performing? The campaign just had a webinar yesterday on states changing their standards, how far away they are from NAEP, the changing cut scores, all these things. Does the right care about that? I'm not sure. So I would just love to hear from both of you about parents, their role in these cultural things that you're talking about, and especially the influence on education.
So, thinking about parents, and especially parents who are on my kind of may or may not care about the right thing side of the aisle. And then I'll offer my 2 cents.
Two quick thoughts. First of all, as a parent of a 6-year-old, I get home, my wife and I get home, we're tired, then he has like pages and pages of homework. It is hard. It is exhausting. And parents have an incredibly important role to play in education. I see that as let's empower parents as much as we can, and also focus on what happens during the day. Let's make sure there's a standard of excellence that we expect and we meet. And the other piece is around parent choice. We believe deeply in parent choice. I think where there's daylight is public school choice versus private school choice. But all of us, everyone, we exercise choice every day in our kids' lives. Those of us who have the means, many of us, we've moved to better districts, right? That have better schools, and we've purchased the best free education that money can buy, or we send kids to private schools. And so, I think it's just basic. Families without means deserve choice, just like families with means. And so, placing parents and families at the center of it, we think is an important and core policy priority.
Yeah, I'll say from my 2 cents. One, I absolutely think parents have a right to be heard and be involved. I do think one of the problems, when I started doing this stuff back 30 years ago, when I was, many of you all have heard me tell the story, when I was supervising student teachers in the Boston Public Schools in the 90s, one of the problems was it was incredibly easy to find a mentor teacher who would tell their student teacher, "You did great." And I would say, "Hey, there looked like 8 or 10 kids in the back who were just tuned out." And they'd say, yeah. But every kid who was here to learn was engaged. And there was this notion that a teacher's job was to teach the kids who were there to learn. And we changed, one of the great bipartisan triumphs of the last quarter century was we changed that expectation. The job of schools and educators is to educate every child. That was a wonderful thing. However, I do think it has created this problem that we have created a generation of leaders on the left and the right who have, in schools and in office, who have become incredibly uncomfortable talking about parental responsibility in this process. Because it feels like talking about parental responsibility is to get back to scapegoating kids and families, to blaming them. And so for me, I think we need to talk about the rights of parents to be involved, but also their responsibilities. When you look at the data on chronic absenteeism, for instance, Morgan Polikoff has done the work with Brookings, which shows that the leading reason that kids are chronically absent is they tell the parent they don't feel like going to school that day. And the parents are like, all right. That's not okay. And we need to get away from kind of the notion that it is okay. As far as the right-wing parents not caring about the right things, I think that's nuts. I just don't buy that for a second. I do think you find skepticism among parents, right and left, as to whether the metrics we're looking at are measuring the right things. So, by 2008, 2009, 70% of the nation's schools were failing under No Child Left Behind. And it turned out that most of these parents said, yeah, I don't believe your system, I believe my eyes. And I think so what happens is you find that when you survey parents about what they pick schools based upon, test scores tend to come in 10th to 15th, but that's because parents think that they are a deeply imperfect measure of what's going on in a school. But yeah, I'm biased being a right-winger, but the right-wingers I talk to in focus groups and across the nation, I think they care about what's good for their kid, but we have honest disagreements about how best to gauge that. Riley, get Bethany? Oh, right there, yeah, right there. You know, yes, sir.
Wow. Counselor Priest, thank you. Leon Peace. I'm a part-time substitute teacher at Montgomery County Public Schools. My question is, what solutions would you suggest, if there are any, to address an emerging problem in our public educational landscape with respect to what's called now as new arrivals, this children of the parents who, many of whom may have walked here to the country. But what we're seeing, or what I'm seeing, is that in the classroom, the children are there and they apparently have no educational background, in that, as far as I can tell, they have no idea why they're in that building, and they may get the sense that it's some sort of minimum security penal facility, the way they act with the teacher. Now, it's not everyone, but if it's a classroom with 32 people, you may have 3 or 4 who are
So
non-literate.
how to address this challenge?
Yeah, they can't read English or Spanish.
Yeah, Jorge?
Yeah. So, as an educator inside of the schools, I would ask you that question. You would have, in all honesty, like more insight into that than I would have. But I'll say a couple things. When I was mayor, I would tour schools every single week. And I've been in that situation where you have a recent arrival. They only speak Spanish. The teacher only speaks English. There is no learning happening. And so when I was mayor, we created a program to provide an on-ramp to better integrate them into what was happening in our better integrate them into our schools. So we created a new arrival program. We received some pushback for that, and the pushback was we're segregating these kids, not including them into the broader student body. But I saw that as just a no-brainer, something that we needed to do. So that's one quick thought on that. Sort of panning out to the politics of this. First and foremost, those kids, they may not know how to read, they may not know how to hold a pencil sometimes, but they have immigrant parents back home, and I can guarantee you, I know a few things about those parents. Those parents are busting their tail off at wherever it is that they're working, whatever it is that they're doing. That work ethic, that immigrant spirit, that's being imparted to the children. And I've always believed that the better job that we do as a country integrating that first generation and educating them properly, skilling them properly, the more that's going to pay dividends for the workforce, for the individuals, for the workforce, and for the country. So, I'd love to get your thoughts on what needs to be done there. I've seen the challenges.
Emma?
Sure. I'm representing the online community. I have a question from Laura. And so this is for Jorge. What does Mr. Elorza hear or understand about the declining quality of Minnesota charter schools? Is it a sign of things to come in other states?
Yeah. So, charter schools are not a panacea. We support charter schools, but more than that, we support excellence. We support whatever works. And we support charter schools to the extent that they're effective and that they're working, and we don't support charter schools to the extent that they're not effective and they're not working. So I'd love to dive deeper into what's happening in Minnesota to figure out why that's the case. But if you have schools that are not making the grade and they're declining, then we have to do something about it. This kind of touches into the culture war issue that you were raising earlier. Something that really appeals to me politically is this idea of I'm tough because I care. Again, I can't help but take a shot at the other side, but I feel like I hear a little bit too much from Republicans, like sort of like meanness, like just to be mean.
We care because we're tough.
Okay. But like this message of we're going to be tough because we care. Every parent understands that concept. We all understand like why that's good, why we can't be too soft, why discipline matters sometimes, why structure matters. And so if there's a system in place that doesn't have rigorous standards and accountability and allows low-performing schools to continue without any accountability, then that's a problem. That's a problem that needs to be fixed. Hopefully, there's a policy solution to it, and if it requires a politics solution, that's part of the work that we do and we're engaged in.
Riley?
Bethany Little with Education Council. My recollection of one of the reasons that ed reform Democrats had significant power and heft in our heyday was because people knew you could get things done in partnership with education reform Republicans. I was surprised when Rick asked you why we are no longer in our heyday. You didn't mention the demise of the ed reform Republican in favor of privatization and culture war. I'm curious if that does play into how you're doing your job and how much you're able to do it.
Yeah, that's a great question. Thank you for that. Yeah, so, our theory of the case when we were founded was, frankly, our party was more resistant to reform, but if we can get support from just a few Democrats, you add it to the Republicans, and you get to 50% plus one, and we can get stuff done. You're absolutely right that just as it's become hard to have our party embrace charter schools, it's hard to get Republicans to champion public charter schools as well. Republicans, at least at the elected level, have championed private school choice more. Which brings me again to, this is the case at the elected official level, maybe party leader level. But in all of our polls, when we poll public school choice, and we compare it to private school choice is popular, but public school choice is far more popular with Democrats, independents, and Republicans. And so if there could be a better match between what actual people, what voters truly prefer and want with what our politicians are advocating for, I think it would create space for that bipartisan, for those bipartisan opportunities.
Riley?
Jeff Kwiatkowski with Stride Learning. One of the issues that I think has forged some interesting bipartisan coalitions recently is on open enrollment, sort of a resurgence of open enrollment. I know you're part of the No More Lines coalition as well too. Where do you see that policy in particular as a way to forge those alliances that may have separated a bit with the growth of the private school choice area, but still accomplish many of the same goals about providing more options and choice for families?
Yeah, open enrollment is such a great issue. To be honest with you, so I want to give a shout out to Yes Every Kid for all the work that they've done on open enrollment. Tim DeRoche, the Reason Foundation, they've done a lot of really excellent work on this. They've gotten many Republican states to pass really comprehensive open enrollment laws. I have to tell you that I still don't fully understand the politics behind it. I don't know exactly how they've gotten so many Republican states to pass these laws. As I see this issue, I see it as just as much a Democrat or a liberal issue as it is a conservative one. And so we're hoping to support the broader effort so that we can have as much political success in blue states as they have had in red states. And I love the issue because policy-wise, we have school districts that are usually coterminous with housing districts, housing and zoning maps that were drawn by discriminatory housing policies of the past. And if we can disentangle them and decouple, housing from education, that's a net win for our community. It gives them more education choice and freedom. So that's on the one side. It's very much aligned with democratic values. And then the second piece is that it's certainly a move towards choice. And when I think about choice generally, choice is popular because of course it is, right? Of course it is. People want more choice, especially when they haven't had great choices. And if we can get our party sort of lay the breadcrumbs where we can get more comfortable saying the word choice when it comes to education and get us to embrace and champion education choice policies, that gets us one step closer to embracing other forms of choice. So not only value-wise, but strategically, I love this issue.
So let's leave it there. Jorge, it was, it's always, here we are 5 days from an election where we spend a lot of time screaming at each other. So thank you for actually coming over and having a conversation about policies and ideas and practical challenges. Who would have thought it? America Today in DC. Thank you all for joining us. Appreciate it. Anybody who wants to find it, this will be available on the AI website later today or tomorrow. And Jorge, my friend, thank you so much for making the time.
Yeah, thank you.
Have a good day.